The rest area off Highway 47 had always been a quiet stop for weary travelers, until the night a gang of bikers decided to make it their territory. They thought they'd found an easy target in the lone man sitting at a weathered picnic table. What they didn't know was that Jack Winters had spent 15 years as a Marine Force Recon operator, and he wasn't about to let anyone terrorize innocent people. The setting sun painted long shadows across Mountain Pine Rest area, its faded welcome sign barely visible in the dimming light. A crisp autumn wind rustled through the towering pines that surrounded the concrete oasis, carrying with it the first hints of an approaching storm. The small cluster of buildings, a weather-worn comfort station, a rustic information kiosk, and a handful of covered picnic areas, stood as the last refuge for travelers along this desolate stretch of highway, the only sign of civilization for 50 miles in either direction. Jack Winters sat at one of the wooden picnic tables, his thermos of black coffee growing cold as he watched the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. His motorcycle, a meticulously maintained Harley-Davidson Street Bob, was parked nearby, its chrome still gleaming despite the hundreds of miles he'd covered since morning. The fall weather had aggravated the old shrapnel wound in his shoulder, but 15 years in the Marines had taught him to embrace discomfort like an old friend. The memories of his last deployment still haunted him sometimes, especially on quiet evenings like this when his mind had too much time to wander. Rachel Torres, the rest area's supervisor, emerged from the main building, her keys jingling as she locked up the information center for the evening. She'd gotten to know Jack over the past few months. He'd stop here every few weeks during his cross-country rides, always polite, always keeping to himself. She'd noticed the military precision in how he carried himself, the way his eyes constantly scanned his surroundings, old habits that never quite fade away. Her own brother had served in the Marines, and she recognized the subtle signs of someone who had seen more than their share of combat. The rest area was quieter than usual tonight. A mother and her teenage daughter were having dinner at a distant table, their conversation carried away by the wind. Two traveling salesmen in wrinkled suits dozed in their parked sedan, their sales materials scattered across the back seat after a long day on the road. An elderly couple walked their golden retriever near the tree line, their peaceful evening routine a stark contrast to the tension building in the air. The autumn breeze carried the scent of pine needles and approaching rain, a deceptively peaceful scene that belied the weight of Jack's growing unease. Dark clouds continued to gather overhead, their ominous presence matching the disquiet that had been gnawing at Jack's instincts all evening. Years of combat had honed his situational awareness into something approaching a sixth sense, and tonight, something felt off. He took another sip of his cooling coffee, his free hand unconsciously touching the combat knife concealed beneath his leather jacket. The weapon was a reminder of his promise to never be caught unprepared again, not after what happened to his unit in Kandahar. Rachel had just reached her small office when she noticed Jack's subtle change in posture. She'd seen that look before in her brother who'd served 3 tours in Iraq, the calm alertness of a warrior sensing trouble. The wind picked up, sending fallen leaves skittering across the cracked asphalt of the parking lot, their rustling barely audible over the distant rumble of approaching engines. Her hand instinctively moved to the pepper spray on her keychain, a habit formed from years of working alone at the isolated rest stop. The sound grew louder, a growling crescendo that echoed off the surrounding mountains like approaching thunder. Jack's eyes narrowed as he watched the highway entrance, his coffee forgotten on the weathered wooden table. The mother and daughter stopped their conversation, looking up with growing concern as 5 motorcycles roared into the parking lot, their riders' leather cuts adorned with patches that spoke of violence and territorial claims. The chrome on their bikes was dull and scratched, unlike the well-maintained machine Jack rode. The lead rider cut his engine, the sudden silence more menacing than the noise. Victor Viper Kovalev surveyed the rest area like a predator choosing its prey, the snake tattoo on his neck seeming to writhe with each turn of his head. Behind him, his crew spread out in a practiced formation that reminded Jack of combat patrols he'd led in another life. Blade, his enforcer, cracked his knuckles as he dismounted, brass rings glinting on his fingers. Shadow and Rex flanked the group, their movements synchronized with years of intimidation practice. Danny Chen, the newest member, hung back with uncertainty in his eyes. his neat appearance and hesitant manner marking him as different from the others. Rachel's hand tightened around her keys as she watched the scene unfold. The elderly couple quickly retreated to their RV, pulling their golden retriever along as the dog growled softly at the newcomers. The mother at the distant table gathered her daughter close, their half-eaten dinner forgotten as they edged toward their car. The salesman stirred and turned awake, tension evident in their faces as they observed the newcomers through their windows, hands reaching for cell phones they knew would find no signal in this remote location. The wind carried the first few drops of rain, cool droplets that dotted the pavement like tears. Jack remained seated, his posture relaxed, but his mind calculating angles and distances, escape routes, and potential weapons. He'd seen men like these before, in various corners of the world, men who mistook cruelty for strength, who preyed on those they perceived as weak. The coming storm wasn't just in the clouds above. It was in the predatory grins of the bikers as they stalked toward the picnic area, in the frightened eyes of the other travelers, and in the deadly calm that settled over Jack Winters as he prepared for what was about to unfold. Viktor Viper Kovalev sauntered toward Jack's table, his boots scraping against the asphalt with deliberate slowness. His crew spread out behind him, maintaining their practiced formation that spoke of countless similar confrontations. Blade lingered to Jack's left, his brass-adorned fingers flexing in anticipation, the scarred knuckles telling stories of violence. Shadow and Rex positioned themselves to cut off any escape routes, their weathered leather cuts decorated with patches that celebrated their most vicious encounters. Danny Chen remained near the motorcycles, his unease growing more visible with each passing moment, his relatively clean jacket marking him as a recent addition to their ranks. Rachel Torres stood frozen in her office doorway, her phone clutched in her trembling hand, knowing it was both a lifeline and a useless piece of plastic out here in the mountains. The closest police station was 30 minutes away on a good day, and tonight's approaching storm would only make that response time longer. She watched as the mother and daughter quickened their pace toward their car, the teenagers' eyes wide with fear as they hurried past the bikers, their half-eaten dinner abandoned on the picnic table. "Nice bike you got there," Victor called out, his voice carrying a false friendliness that set everyone's nerves on edge. His snake tattoo seemed to pulse in the fading light as he nodded toward Jack's Harley. The intricate scales caught the dimming sunlight, making the reptile appear to writhe across his weathered skin. "You must take real good care of it. Be a shame if something happened to such a beautiful machine. Chrome like that scratches easy, you know." Jack didn't move from his seat, but his eyes tracked every slight movement of Victor's crew. His coffee sat forgotten, steam no longer rising from the dark liquid. 15 years of combat experience had taught him to notice the small details, the way Shadow favored his right side, how Rex's hand kept straying to his jacket pocket, the nervous energy radiating from Danny Chen. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, carrying the weight of someone who had faced far worse threats in far more dangerous places. "Is there something I can help you gentlemen with?" Blade let out a harsh laugh, the sound echoing off the rest area's concrete walls like broken glass. "Hear that, boss? He called us gentlemen." His brass rings caught the last rays of sunlight as he cracked his knuckles, each one adorned with crude symbols of violence. "Real polite type, ain't he? Maybe too polite for his own good out here." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes as he placed both hands on Jack's table, leaning forward until his face was uncomfortably close. The smell of leather and cigarettes mingled with the approaching rain. "See, here's the thing. This stretch of road, it's ours now. Every mile from the county line to River Junction belongs to us. And we got a toll for folks who want to stop here." He glanced around at the other travelers, his voice rising slightly to ensure they all heard the threat in his words. "Consider it a safety fee. Insurance against accidents. You wouldn't want any accidents out here, would you? Long way from help." The salesmen in their sedan started their engine, but Rex and Shadow quickly moved to block their exit, their boots splashing in the growing puddles. The elderly couple huddled in their RV, their dogs muffled barking barely audible over the growing wind. Their golden retriever's protective instincts recognized the predators outside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rachel's grip tightened on her phone, her brother's voice echoing in her memory. Sometimes the worst danger isn't the obvious threat. It's underestimating the quiet ones. Jack's expression remained neutral, but his muscles coiled beneath his leather jacket like steel cables ready to snap. He noticed Danny Chen's hesitation, the way the young man kept glancing between his fellow bikers and the frightened families. A potential weak link in their chain of intimidation, someone who hadn't fully embraced the violence his companions celebrated. "This is public property," Jack said evenly, each word precise and measured. "Maintained by state taxes. No tolls required. No territory to claim." Victor's smile vanished, replaced by a sneer that made his snake tattoo contort grotesquely in the fading light. "Wrong answer, old man." He straightened up, gesturing to Blade with a sharp jerk of his chin. "Maybe we need to show him how we handle stubborn folks around here. How we deal with people who don't understand the new management." Rain began to fall in earnest now, fat drops drumming against the picnic table's metal roof like nature's warning bells. Shadow and Rex moved closer, their boots splashing in the growing puddles, creating ripples that distorted their reflections. The mother and daughter had reached their car but remained trapped in the parking lot, blocked in by the bikers' motorcycles, their faces pale with fear behind the rain-streaked windows. "Last chance," Victor growled, his hand sliding toward the heavy chain coiled at his belt. The steel links clinked together ominously, a sound Jack recognized from darker times in distant places. "Pay the toll or we start breaking things. Starting with that pretty bike of yours. Then maybe we move on to teaching you some respect." Jack finally moved, his motion so smooth it seemed almost casual to untrained eyes. He stood slowly, his height matching Victor's, but there was something in his stance that made the biker leader take an unconscious step back. 15 years of combat training radiated from Jack's every movement, though none of the bikers yet recognized the deadly grace of a Marine Force Recon operator, the precise economy of motion that marked him as something far more dangerous than a simple traveler. "I'm going to give you one opportunity," Jack said, his voice carrying the same tone he'd used when leading men through combat zones, when every word could mean the difference between life and death. "Take your people and leave. Whatever happens next is your choice, but you won't enjoy the consequences." The wind picked up, driving the rain sideways and forcing the bikers to squint against the weather. Danny Chen's uncertainty had transformed into outright concern as he watched Jack's transformation from seated stranger to something altogether more dangerous. His hand unconsciously moved toward his bike, sensing the shift in atmosphere that his more aggressive companions seemed to miss. Victor's face contorted with rage at the challenge to his authority. He hadn't built his reputation by backing down, especially not from a lone man at a rest stop. His fingers curled around the chain at his belt, the metal cold against his skin. "Get him," he snarled, reaching for his weapon as Blade and Shadow moved forward with predatory grins. They had no way of knowing they'd just made the worst mistake of their lives. Rachel's finger hovered over her phone's emergency call button as thunder rolled overhead, nature's percussion accompanying the violence about to unfold at Mountain Pine Rest Area. The coming storm wouldn't be the most dangerous thing these bikers faced tonight. That honor belonged to the calm veteran who had finally found a reason to unleash the skills he'd hoped to never use again. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in stark flashes as Blade made his first move. His brass-knuckled fist swung in a wide arc aimed at Jack's head, the kind of punch that had ended dozens of previous confrontations. But Jack wasn't there anymore. He moved with liquid precision, decades of training taking over as he stepped inside Blade's reach, using the larger man's momentum against him. Before anyone could register what happened, Blade stumbled forward, his own force carrying him face first into the picnic table. The crack of his nose breaking was lost in a roll of thunder, but the spray of blood on the weathered wood told its own story. Shadow and Rex hesitated for a split second, their usual confidence shaken by the unexpectedly swift response. "You're gonna die for that," Victor snarled, unwinding the chain from his belt. The steel links hissed through the rain like an echo of his tattoo. "Nobody touches my crew." He swung the chain in a vicious arc, but Jack had already calculated this move, had seen the tension in Victor's shoulder telegraph the attack. Jack caught the chain mid-swing, the steel links wrapping around his forearm. The impact would have broken a weaker man's bones, but combat-hardened muscles absorbed the shock. With a sharp twist, he yanked Victor off balance, sending him sprawling into shadow. The two bikers went down in a tangle of limbs and curses. Rachel watched from her doorway, her heart pounding as she witnessed Jack's transformation. Gone was the quiet traveler who stopped for coffee. In his place stood a warrior, each movement precise and deadly. She'd seen her brother practice martial arts before, but this was different. This was the real thing, honed in actual combat. Rex pulled a knife from his jacket, the blade gleaming in another flash of lightning. "Not so tough without your chain, are you?" he taunted, circling to Jack's left. But his grip on the knife betrayed his amateur status. Too tight, too rigid. Jack had disarmed countless insurgents in close-quarter combat. This would be no different. Danny Chen backed away from the violence, his eyes wide, as he watched the scene unfold. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. The gang had promised brotherhood, respect, a sense of belonging. Instead, he was watching his supposed brothers get systematically dismantled by one man in a rain-soaked parking lot. The mother and daughter had retreated to their car, the teenager filming everything on her phone. The salesmen remained trapped in their sedan, their headlights illuminating the brutal dance through curtains of rain. The elderly couple's dog barked frantically from inside their RV, sensing the violence outside. Blade struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his broken nose. "Kill him!" he screamed, his voice thick and wet. "What are you waiting for?" Shadow and Victor disentangled themselves, rage replacing their earlier confidence. Rex lunged forward with his knife, but Jack moved like water through the rain. In one fluid motion, Jack stepped past Rex's strike, gripped his wrist, and applied pressure to nerves that hadn't changed since he'd learned their locations in combat training. The knife clattered to the wet pavement as Rex's hand spasmed open. Before the biker could react, Jack swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing down hard. Victor had retrieved his chain and was swinging it wildly now, all pretense of skill abandoned in his fury. "You're dead. You hear me? Dead." But his attacks were desperate, uncontrolled. Jack moved through them with the same calm precision that had kept him alive in war zones across the world. Shadow tried to grab Jack from behind, but years of CQC training took over. Jack drove an elbow into solar plexus, followed by a strike to the throat that left Shadow gasping in the mud. Blade charged again, his brass knuckles seeking revenge, but Jack redirected his momentum into Victor's incoming chain. The steel links caught Blade's temple instead of their intended target, and he dropped like a stone. The rain continued to pour, washing blood into the growing puddles at their feet. Thunder rolled overhead as Jack stood among the fallen bikers, his breathing controlled, his stance ready for more. Victor struggled to his feet, his snake tattoo distorted by the streams of water running down his neck. What are you?" Victor gasped, genuine fear replacing his earlier bravado. He'd led this crew through countless fights, but he'd never seen anything like this, never encountered someone who moved like death itself. Jack's voice carried clearly through the storm, calm as ever. "I'm the wrong man to test tonight. Take your people and go. Don't come back." The authority in his tone, the kind that could only be earned through real combat, left no room for argument. Danny Chen was already on his bike, its engine roaring to life. He'd seen enough. The others slowly backed away, helping their injured companions to their feet. Victor's face was a mask of humiliation and rage as he retrieved his chain from where it had fallen. "This isn't over," he spat. But the threat sounded hollow, even to his own ears. They all knew it was over. They just hadn't expected it to end like this. The aftermath of the brief but violent confrontation hung in the air, like the lingering electricity from the storm. Victor and his crew retreated to their motorcycles, their movements stiff with pain and wounded pride. Blade pressed his sleeve against his broken nose, leaving dark stains on his leather jacket. Shadow massaged his throat where Jack's strike had landed, while Rex could barely grip his handlebars with his numbed fingers. Rain continued to pour, but the rest area's fluorescent lights had flickered on, casting harsh shadows across the scene. Jack remained by the picnic table, his posture still combat-ready as he watched the bikers mount their machines. His clothes were soaked through, but he showed no sign of discomfort. Years of operating in hostile environments had taught him never to relax until the threat was completely gone. Rachel Torres emerged from her office armed with the baseball bat she kept behind her desk. She moved to stand near Jack, her presence a silent show of support. The mother and daughter remained in their car, the teenager's phone still recording through the rain-streaked window. The salesmen had killed their engine but stayed locked in their sedan, while the elderly couple watched from their RV. Their dog's barking finally subsided to a low growl. "You don't know what you've started," Victor called out, his voice carrying over the rumble of idling engines. The snake tattoo on his neck seemed to writhe with each angry twist of his head. "This is our territory. We've got friends, lots of them. This isn't over by a long shot." Jack's response was measured, his combat-trained voice cutting through the storm with practiced authority. "It is over, unless you want me to demonstrate more thoroughly." His hands remained loose at his sides, but every biker there now understood the lethal capability contained in those relaxed fingers. Danny Chen kicked his bike to life first, eager to put distance between himself and the humiliation he'd witnessed. The others followed suit, their engines creating a cacophony that echoed off the rest area's concrete walls. Victor was the last to start his motorcycle, his eyes locked on Jack with a mixture of hatred and fear. "You think this makes you tough?" Victor spat, blood from his split lip staining his teeth. "Taking on 5 guys by yourself? That just makes you stupid. Nobody stands alone out here." He revved his engine aggressively, sending a rooster tail of water from his back tire. "I've never stood alone," Jack replied, memories of his fallen brothers in arms flashing through his mind. "And I won't start tonight. This place is off limits to you and your crew. Spread the word." The authority in his voice, honed through years of commanding men in combat situations, left no room for debate. The bikers roared out of the parking lot, their taillights disappearing into the stormy night like angry red eyes swallowed by darkness. The sound of their engines faded gradually, replaced by the steady drumming of rain and distant thunder. Only then did Jack allow his muscles to relax slightly, though his senses remained alert for any sign of their return. Rachel approached cautiously, her bat lowered but still gripped firmly. "That was—" "I've never seen anything like that," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and concern. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" Jack's eyes remained fixed on the highway entrance as he answered. "Force Recon. 15 years. You learn to handle yourself, or you don't come home." He finally turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. "You should call the police. They'll be back, probably with more people." The mother and daughter emerged from their car, the teenager still clutching her phone. "I got it all on video," the girl announced, her earlier fear replaced by excitement. "That was like something from an action movie, the way you moved, how you took them all down." "Delete it," Jack said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "Videos like that just escalate things, make them more likely to return with guns instead of chains and knives." The girl's face fell, but she nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. The salesmen finally ventured from their sedan, straightening their wrinkled suits as they approached. "That was incredible," the taller one said, extending his hand. "Mike Johnson. This is Luis Rodriguez. We thought we were about to witness a murder, but not the way it turned out." Jack shook their hands briefly, his tactical mind already working on the next steps. "You should all leave," he advised the group. "They'll be back, and next time they'll be better prepared. They'll want to prove themselves after this." Rachel frowned, gripping her bat tighter. "I can't leave. This is my job, my responsibility. The state depends on me to keep this place running, to help travelers. Her voice carried the same sense of duty that Jack recognized from his own service. Then we need to prepare, Jack said, his mind shifting into the familiar territory of tactical planning. They'll want revenge, but they'll wait until they think they have the advantage. We have some time. The elderly couple had ventured from their RV, their golden retriever straining at its leash as they approached. "We're staying too," the husband announced, his voice carrying the gruff authority of a man who'd made his share of stands in life. "Been on the road 3 months in that RV, not about to let some thugs run us off." Jack looked at the gathered group. Rachel with her bat, the elderly couple with their protective dog, the salesmen still straightening their suits, and the mother and daughter who had found courage after fear. It wasn't a Marine fire team, but he'd learned long ago that courage came in many forms. "All right," he said, his voice carrying the same tone he'd used when briefing troops before combat operations. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. Everyone inside. We need to talk strategy." The group moved toward the main building as the storm continued to rage overhead. Jack took one last look at the highway entrance, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, Victor and his crew were already planning their return. The night was far from over. Inside the rest area's main building, fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Jack assessed their situation with the same methodical approach he'd used during combat planning sessions. Rachel had brewed fresh coffee for everyone, the familiar aroma bringing a small measure of normalcy to the tense atmosphere. The elderly couple, who had introduced themselves as Bill and Martha Wilson, sat with their golden retriever, Max, at one of the interior tables. The salesmen, Mike and Luis, had spread out their roadmaps on another table, marking possible escape routes. Sarah Parker and her daughter Emily huddled near the vending machines, the teenager's phone now tucked away as requested. "First thing you need to understand," Jack began, his voice carrying the weight of experience, "is that they're not just angry, they're humiliated. That makes them more dangerous. Victor will want to restore his reputation, and he'll bring enough force to ensure it." He moved to the large window, scanning the rain-soaked parking lot. "How many entrances and exits are there?" Rachel stepped forward, her keys jingling at her belt. "Main entrance from the highway, service road around, back for maintenance vehicles, and an emergency access path that connects to the old forest road." She paused, considering. "The forest road is barely maintained, but it's passable in good weather." "Not in this storm," Bill interjected, his weathered face creased with concern. "Martha and I tried it last summer in the RV, nearly got stuck with just a light drizzle. It'll be a mud pit now." Jack nodded, processing the information. "That works in our favor. Limits their approach options." He turned to Mike and Luis. "Those maps show the surrounding area? I need to know every possible route they might take." Luis spread out a detailed regional map, his sales training showing in his precise movements. Highway 47 runs north-south. Nearest town is Miller's Creek, 30 miles south. Next closest is River Junction, 45 minutes north. Not much in between except logging roads and hunting trails. "Cell service?" Jack asked, though he already knew the answer. "Spotty at best," Rachel confirmed. "We've got a landline in the office, but the storms usually knock it out. Radio works sometimes. We keep one for emergencies." She gestured to an old CB radio mounted near her desk. Sarah Parker stepped forward, her arm around Emily's shoulders. "We can't just sit here waiting for them to come back. We should leave while we can." Her voice trembled slightly, but there was steel beneath the fear. Jack shook his head. "Roads are dangerous in this weather, especially with angry bikers out there. They'll be watching the highway, expecting us to run. Better to hold position and prepare." He looked at Rachel. "What supplies do we have?" Rachel moved to the storage room, taking inventory as she spoke. "First aid kit, some basic tools, emergency flares. We keep flashlights and batteries for power outages. There's a generator, but it's only meant for essential systems." She emerged carrying a heavy toolbox. "This is everything from maintenance." "The RV has supplies," Martha offered. Food, water, some basic medical stuff. Bill's got his hunting rifle, though it's locked up. She stroked Max's head absently, the dog's presence seemingly calming her nerves. Jack considered this information, his tactical mind evaluating their assets. The rifle stays locked unless absolutely necessary. We're defending ourselves, not looking for a firefight. He turned to Mike and Luis. Your car. How much gas? 3/4 tank, Mike replied. We filled up in Miller's Creek. Good. If things go bad, you'll take Sarah and Emily out through the service road. Bill and Martha's RV is too obvious a target, but a sedan might slip past in the darkness. Jack's planning was interrupted by distant thunder and the flickering of lights overhead. Rachel checked her watch, anxiety crossing her face. Power gets iffy in storms like this. Generator will keep basic lights on, but we'll lose most of the exterior illumination. Work with what we have, Jack said, falling back on his military training. Everyone should gather essential belongings from their vehicles now, while we still have decent visibility. Mike, Luis, get your car backed into the service road, hidden but ready to move. Bill, Martha, the RV stays where it is. It's too visible to move now, and we might need it as a barrier. The group began to move with purpose, Jack's calm authority helping to focus their nervous energy. As they prepared to venture into the rain, he caught Rachel's arm gently. Those tools, any long pipes or heavy wrenches? She nodded, understanding. Basic maintenance kit. Nothing fancy, but better than bare hands. Perfect. We're not looking for weapons. Just defensive tools. His mind flashed to similar improvisations in combat zones. And Rachel? When they come back, they'll be looking to make examples. Anyone who stood with me becomes a target. You sure you want to stay? Rachel's grip tightened on her baseball bat, her brother's dog tags visible beneath her collar. This is my post. I'm not abandoning it to thugs. Her voice carried the same conviction he'd heard countless times from good soldiers. Jack nodded, recognizing and respecting the decision. All right, but we do this smart. No heroes, no unnecessary risks. We hold position, protect our people, and wait for an opportunity to end this decisively. Outside, the storm continued to build, wind driving sheets of rain against the windows. Somewhere out there, Victor and his crew were nursing their wounds and planning their revenge. But this time, they wouldn't be facing a lone veteran. They'd be facing a prepared position and a group of ordinary people who had found their courage. Jack checked his watch. If his combat experience was any indicator, they had maybe 2 hours before Victor returned with reinforcements. 2 hours to turn a public rest area into a defensive position. 2 hours to prepare these civilians for what was coming. It would have to be enough. Thunder crackled overhead as the group worked to fortify their position, turning the rest area's main building into a makeshift stronghold. Jack supervised their preparations with the same attention to detail he'd used when securing forward operating bases in hostile territory. Every entrance was barricaded, every potential vulnerability addressed, all while keeping escape routes clear. Rachel and Mike worked on securing the main entrance using maintenance equipment and heavy benches to create a controlled choke point. Luis helped Bill retrieve essential supplies from the RV, making quick dashes through the rain while Martha kept watch from inside. Sarah and Emily sorted through their gathered resources, organizing them with surprising efficiency. Max, the Wilsons' golden retriever, patrolled between groups, his protective instincts clearly activated by the tension in the air. The windows are our biggest weakness, Jack explained, directing the placement of tables and vending machines. We want clear lines of sight while maintaining cover. Anything that can stop a thrown object or... He paused, considering his audience. Other projectiles. The implications hung heavy in the air. Rachel wiped sweat from her forehead as she helped Mike angle a heavy desk. They wouldn't really shoot up a public rest stop, would they? But her voice carried more resignation than doubt. Her years working the late shift had taught her how dark things could get on isolated stretches of highway. Victor lost face, Jack replied, checking the stability of their barrier. Men like that, their reputation is everything. And he's got to be thinking about the video Emily took, even if she deleted it. He'll want to make sure there are no witnesses to tonight's events. Bill emerged from the rain, carrying the last of their supplies from the RV. Got the CB radio working, he announced, setting down a portable unit. Been listening to chatter. A lot of bikers talking about gathering at Miller's Creek. Sounds like Victor's calling in favors. Jack nodded grimly. Expected that. How many? Hard to say, Bill replied, cleaning his glasses on his shirt. But I counted at least 3 different groups responding. Could be looking at 20, maybe 30 riders. Sarah hugged Emily closer, fear creeping back into her expression. 30? We can't fight 30 bikers. We need to call the police, get help out here. Already tried, Rachel said, holding up the landline phone. Lines are dead, probably from the storm. Cell service is still out too. She looked at Jack. That old Forest Service radio in my office might reach the ranger station, but it's spotty in good weather. Jack considered their options, his military training kicking in. Keep trying the radio, but we plan as if help isn't coming. 20 or 30 doesn't matter if we control the battlefield. They'll have numbers, but we have position and preparation. He turned to the group. Everyone needs to know their role. No hesitation, no confusion when they arrive. The next hour was spent drilling their defensive plan. Jack assigned positions, established communication signals, and taught basic defensive maneuvers. His experience training new Marines proved valuable as he broke down complex tactics into simple, memorable instructions. Mike Luis, you're our exit team. When I give the signal, your only job is getting Sarah and Emily to safety. Don't stop for anything. The salesman nodded, their earlier fear replaced by determined focus. Bill, Martha, you and Max stay in the back office. It's our last fallback position and you're our final surprise if things go wrong. Rachel stepped forward, baseball bat resting on her shoulder. What about me? Jack studied her stance, recognizing the same resolve he'd seen in countless soldiers. You're with me. We're the first line. Like you said, this is your post. He demonstrated a proper grip on the bat, adjusting her stance slightly. Remember, they'll expect victims, not defenders. Use that surprise. Emily, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. What about psychological warfare? Everyone turned to look at the teenager, who blushed but continued. I mean, they're expecting to scare us, right? But what if we scare them instead? The lights, the storm, the building, we could use it all. A slow smile spread across Jack's face. Now that's tactical thinking. He looked around the building with fresh eyes. Rachel, those exterior lights. Can you control them individually? From the maintenance panel. They're on different circuits for power saving. Perfect. Emily, what else you got? The teenager grew more animated. The PA system for announcements, we could use that to seem bigger than we are. And the security mirrors make it hard to tell how many people are in here. Plus, with the storm and the windows covered. Jack nodded approvingly. Sometimes the best defense is making the enemy question their own plan. Good thinking, Emily. The girl beamed at the praise, standing a little straighter. They spent the next 30 minutes implementing Emily's suggestions, turning the rest area's ordinary features into psychological advantages. The security mirrors were adjusted to create confusing reflections. The PA system was tested and positioned strategically. Rachel demonstrated how to manipulate the exterior lighting for maximum disorientation. Remember, Jack addressed the group one final time. We're not looking for a fight. We're protecting ourselves and each other. If they think this place is too much trouble, if we can make them question their own strength, they'll leave. That's our goal. Thunder rolled overhead as if emphasizing his words. Through the rain-streaked windows, headlights became visible on the highway, moving in groups of 2 and 3. The distant rumble of motorcycles carried through the storm. They're coming, Rachel said quietly, gripping her bat. Jack moved to his position, his voice carrying the calm authority that had led men through countless battles. Remember your training, remember your positions. Most importantly, remember, they are not facing a random group of travelers anymore. They're facing a team. The headlights grew closer, and the rumble of engines became a roar. The night's second battle was about to begin. The storm intensified as motorcycles filled the parking lot, their headlights cutting through the rain like searching spotlights. Jack counted at least 25 bikes, their riders dismounting in practiced formations. Victor stood at the center, his face still bruised from their earlier encounter, the snake tattoo on his neck barely visible in the dim light. He'd changed into the darker clothing and added what looked like a bulletproof vest beneath his leather cut. They're trying to flank the building, Jack observed quietly, watching through a narrow gap in their barricade. Several bikers moved towards the service entrance, while others spread out to cover the emergency exits. Good. Let them think they're being clever. Rachel stood beside him, her baseball bat ready. The rest of their group had taken their assigned positions, Mike and Luis near the rear with the car ready, Sarah and Emily in the designated safe room, and Bill and Martha securing the back office with Max. The dog's low growl carried through the building, sensing the approaching threat. "I count 32, Jack continued, his tactical assessment automatic after years of combat. Victor brought the Snake Eyes gang from Miller's Creek. Looks like some road reapers, too. But they're not used to working together. We can use that." Through the storm's fury, Victor's voice boomed across the parking lot. "Come on out, hero. Let's see how tough you are against some real numbers." His borrowed confidence was evident in his stance, bolstered by the small army at his back. Among them, Jack spotted Danny Chen, looking even more uncomfortable than before. Jack remained silent, implementing their psychological strategy. Rachel moved to the control panel, waiting for his signal. The exterior light still illuminated the parking lot, creating a false sense of normalcy that would soon change. "Last chance!" Victor shouted. "Come out now, maybe we only break a few bones, make us come in there." He left the threat hanging. Behind him, Blade cracked his knuckles, his nose still swollen from their previous encounter. Emily's voice suddenly crackled through the PA system, distorted and eerily amplified by the storm. "This is a restricted area. All unauthorized personnel must leave immediately." The professional announcement, combined with the teenage girl's natural talent for dramatic delivery, echoed ominously across the parking lot. Some of the bikers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't the response they'd expected. Victor's face contorted with rage. "Playing games? Fine. We'll do this the hard way." He gestured to his crew. "Tear this place apart." Jack gave Rachel the signal. In an instant, the exterior lights went dark, plunging the parking lot into near-total darkness. Lightning flashed, creating stark shadows that made it impossible to judge distances or numbers. The security mirrors they'd positioned caught and reflected the bikers' own headlights, creating confusing patterns of light and movement. "What the hell?" one of the road reapers shouted, startled by the sudden change. The storm's intensity seemed to increase, wind driving the rain sideways and forcing the bikers to shield their faces. Through the PA system, Emily's voice continued, now mixed with pre-recorded announcements that created a cacophony of overlapping warnings. The effect was disorienting, making it impossible to determine the source or number of speakers. Max's deep barking added to the chaos, the sound amplified by the building's acoustics to seem like multiple dogs. "Enough of this," Your Victor roared. "Break down the doors, all of them." Groups of bikers rushed the entrances, but Jack had anticipated this. The main doors, apparently barricaded shut, were actually part of a funnel system he'd created. When the bikers finally forced them open, they'd find themselves in a tight corridor created by overturned furniture and equipment, unable to enter more than two at a time. "Remember," Jack said to Rachel, his voice calm despite the chaos outside, "let them commit to the entrance. The more that pack in, the better our position." He checked his watch. Highway patrol should be passing in about 20 minutes. Bill's radio call might not have gotten through clearly, but they stick to their patrol schedule. The first crash came from the main entrance as bikers finally broke through. Rain and wind howled into the building as dark figures pushed forward, only to find themselves trapped in the narrow passage. Their own numbers, meant to be an advantage, now worked against them as they crowded and stumbled over each other. Jack nodded to Rachel, who hit another set of switches. The interior lights began strobing, creating a disorienting effect in the rain-slicked corridor. The bikers' confusion was evident in their startled shouts and curses. "Now," Jack commanded, moving toward the entrance with the same deadly grace he'd shown earlier. Rachel flanked him, her bat held ready. They'd practiced this moment, knew exactly how to use the tight space and strobing lights to their advantage. Outside, Victor screamed orders that were lost in the storm and chaos. More bikers tried to force their way in, but the funnel system forced them to bunch up, turning their superior numbers into a liability. The psychological warfare was working. What should have been a straightforward show of force had become a confusing, disorienting nightmare. Lightning flashed again, illuminating Jack's face as he prepared to meet the first bikers who managed to push through. His expression showed no fear, no uncertainty, only the focused determination of a warrior who had found another battle worth fighting. The night's true test was about to begin. The first bikers to breach the entrance found themselves in a nightmare of strobing lights, confined space, and precise violence. Jack moved like a shadow through the chaos, his combat training transforming the narrow corridor into a deadly funnel. The lead biker, a massive man with brass knuckles similar to blades, swung wildly in the disorienting light. Jack slipped past the punch, grabbed the man's leather cut, and used his own momentum to drive him headfirst into the wall. Rachel proved herself a quick study, wielding her baseball bat with the techniques Jack had taught her. She caught a second biker across the knee as he stumbled in the tight space, sending him crashing into those behind him. The domino effect in the narrow corridor created instant chaos among the attackers. "Push them back," Victor's voice carried through the storm. "There's only 2 of them." But his commands only added to the confusion as more bikers tried to force their way inside, creating a bottleneck of leather and cursing bodies. Jack worked methodically, each movement economical and devastating. A quick strike to a solar plexus here, a precise joint lock there. The strobing lights transformed the scene into a series of frozen images. A biker falling, another clutching a broken wrist, a third stumbling backward into his companions. Rachel held her position, protecting their flank just as they'd practiced. Outside, some of the more experienced bikers recognized the trap and tried to reorganize. "Back up," one of them shouted. "We need to regroup." But the press of bodies made retreat impossible. The narrow corridor had become a crushing space of panic and pain. Through the chaos, Jack spotted Danny Chen near the entrance, hesitation clear on his face. Their eyes met briefly in a flash of lightning, and Jack saw the young man's internal struggle. Danny backed away from the entrance, shaking his head. "This is wrong," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. "This isn't what I signed up for." Victor, seeing his assault faltering, changed tactics. "Get the other doors," he commanded. But Jack had anticipated this. The service entrance was blocked by strategically placed maintenance equipment, while the emergency exits had been secured with chains that would take precious time to cut through. Inside the safe room, Sarah held Emily close as they listened to the sounds of combat. The teenager's earlier bravado had given way to quiet determination as she continued broadcasting their pre-recorded announcements through the PA system, adding to the disorientation. The overlapping voices echoed through the building, making it impossible for the attackers to coordinate effectively. Mike and Luis maintained their position near the getaway car, ready to execute their part of the plan if needed. They'd pushed past their initial fear, drawing courage from Jack's calm leadership and the group's unified purpose. Bill and Martha kept watch from the back office, Max's deep growls adding to the psychological warfare. The old hunting rifle remained locked away, but its presence gave them comfort as they monitored the rear of the building. Through their partially opened door, they could hear the chaos at the main entrance. "We need something bigger," Victor shouted from outside. The sound of revving motorcycles suggested they were preparing to use their bikes as battering rams. Jack had anticipated this too. "Rachel, hit the floods," he commanded. Instantly, the powerful floodlights they'd repositioned earlier blazed to life, directly targeting the parking lot. The sudden brightness, combined with the rain and mirror reflections, created a blinding wall of light. Several bikers lost control of their machines on the wet pavement, creating even more confusion. Jack used the moment to launch a counterattack. He moved through the corridor like water, each strike precise and devastating. A biker raised a chain similar to Victor's. Jack caught it and wrapped it around the man's own wrist before driving him into 3 of his companions. Another attacker pulled a knife, but the confined space worked against him. Jack disarmed him with a move learned in close-quarters combat training, using the man's own blade to cut the straps of his leather vest before tossing the weapon aside. "They're everywhere," someone shouted as the strobing lights and mirror reflections created phantom defenders. The PA system's overlapping announcements added to the illusion of a larger force defending the building. Max's barking, amplified and echoing, suggested multiple dogs rather than one protective golden retriever. Rachel held her position, her bat connecting with anyone who made it past Jack. The hours of practice paid off as she maintained her defensive stance, each strike deliberate and effective. "Highway patrol's due in 10 minutes, she called out, loud enough for the attackers to hear. The mention of law enforcement added another layer of urgency to the bikers' growing panic. Through a brief break in the chaos, Jack spotted Victor at the entrance, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. The biker leader had expected an easy show of force, a simple revenge against one man who'd humiliated him. Instead, his crew was being systematically taken apart by what seemed like an entire tactical team. Danny Chen had completely withdrawn from the fight, backing his bike away from the building. Others were beginning to follow his example, their confidence shattered by the unexpected resistance. The psychological warfare was working. What had started as an overwhelming force was disintegrating into confused individual retreats. "Fall back!" someone shouted, and the command was quickly echoed by others. The tide had turned, but Jack knew better than to celebrate too early. Victor was still out there, his reputation now completely in tatters. The most dangerous moment often comes when a predator realizes it's become prey. The night's decisive moment was approaching, and everyone in the rest area knew it would determine whether they spent the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, or if they'd finally put an end to Victor's reign of terror on this stretch of highway. The parking lot had become a scene of chaos and retreat. Bikers scrambled to their motorcycles, their earlier bravado replaced by confusion and fear. The combination of strobing lights, driving rain, and the illusion of multiple defenders had shattered their confidence. Through the streams of water running down the windows, Jack watched as their formation broke apart, individuals and small groups peeling away into the storm-swept darkness. Victor stood in the parking lot, his rage visible even through the curtain of rain. "Cowards!" he screamed at his retreating crew. "Get back here! We're not finished." But his commands held no power now. The mystique of his leadership had been broken, washed away like the blood and rain from the asphalt. Danny Chen remained at the edge of the lot, his bike idling. The young man's internal struggle was evident in his posture as he watched the scene unfold. When Victor turned to him, pointing with a shaking finger, Danny straightened on his motorcycle. "No," he said, his voice carrying clearly through a break in the storm. "I'm done, Victor. This isn't brotherhood. It's just bullying. And you're not even good at that anymore." Jack recognized the moment for what it was, a pivot point where someone chooses to break free from a destructive path. He'd seen it before, in war zones where local allies finally stood up to insurgents, in communities that decided they'd had enough of living in fear. Inside the rest area, Rachel maintained her position, bat still ready. "Highway patrol should be here any minute," she said quietly. The landline phone on her desk suddenly crackled to life. The storm's intensity was finally lessening, allowing signals to get through. Blade, his nose still swollen from their earlier encounter, staggered to his feet near the entrance. Blood dripped from a fresh cut above his eye where he'd caught the edge of a metal shelf in the confusion. "Victor," he called out, his voice nasal and wet. "We need to go. This isn't worth it anymore." But Victor was beyond reason. The night's events had stripped away his carefully constructed image of power, leaving only raw, wounded pride. He reached into his bike's saddlebag and pulled out something that made the remaining bikers back away further. A sawed-off shotgun. "No one leaves," Victor shouted, pointing the weapon first at his retreating crew, then at the building. "You want to see what real power looks like? I'll show you what happens to people who don't respect our territory." Jack's combat instincts kicked into high gear. "Rachel, kill the lights. Everyone down." The rest area plunged into darkness just as Victor fired his first shot. Glass shattered somewhere, and Sarah stifled a scream from their secure room. Max's barking turned aggressive, echoing through the building. Danny Chen chose that moment to act. He gunned his motorcycle forward, the sudden roar of his engine distracting Victor. The shotgun swung toward the sound, but Danny was already in motion, his bike's tires throwing up a spray of water as he curved through the parking lot. Jack used the distraction to move. He slipped through the broken entrance, using the darkness and rain as cover, just as he'd done countless times in combat zones. Victor was highlighted against the remaining motorcycle headlights, making him an easy target to track. "It's over, Victor," Jack called out, his voice seeming to come from multiple directions as it echoed off the building's walls. "The police are coming. Your crew is gone. Put the weapon down and walk away while you can." Victor spun toward Jack's voice, but the veteran was already moving. "Come out and face me!" Victor screamed, his finger tightening on the trigger. "No more tricks, no more games." "You still don't understand," Jack replied, now from a different position. "This was never a game. You brought war to the wrong veteran." His voice carried the weight of every combat mission, every life-or-death moment he'd faced. "I won't tell you again. Put the weapon down." In the distance, sirens became audible over the diminishing storm. Multiple sets getting closer. Victor's head snapped toward the sound, then back to the darkness where he thought Jack was hiding. The shotgun wavered in his hands. Danny Chen revved his engine again, creating another distraction. "It's finished, Victor. Don't make it worse." Other voices joined in. The few remaining bikers who had stayed to watch the outcome now called for their leader to stand down. Jack closed the distance in the moment of Victor's indecision. His movements were silent, practiced, deadly. Before Victor could register the threat, Jack struck. The shotgun clattered to the wet pavement as Victor found himself in a joint lock that threatened to break his arm. 15 years Force Recon, Jack said quietly, his grip precise and unyielding. "I've fought real warriors, Victor. Men who believed in something beyond themselves. You're just a bully with a bike and a bad attitude." The police sirens grew louder, red and blue lights now visible through the rain. Victor sagged in Jack's hold, the fight finally draining from him. The snake tattoo on his neck seemed to deflate, no longer threatening but merely gaudy in the flashing lights. Inside the rest area, Rachel switched the regular lights back on. The other travelers emerged from their positions. Sarah and Emily from the safe room. Mike and Luis from their defensive post. Bill and Martha with Max from the back office. They gathered at the entrance, watching as multiple police cars pulled into the parking lot. Danny Chen kicked down his motorcycle's stand and removed his helmet. He looked at Jack with something between respect and gratitude. "Thank you," he said simply, "for showing me there's another way." The night's violence was over, replaced by the familiar routine of police statements and paramedic checks. But something had changed at Mountain Pine Rest Area. A group of strangers had become something more. They had become a team, brought together by necessity but bound by their shared courage. Red and blue lights painted the rain-slicked parking lot as state troopers secured the scene. Victor sat in the back of a police cruiser, his previous bravado replaced by sullen silence. The few remaining bikers who hadn't fled were being questioned, their statements painting a clear picture of the night's events. Danny Chen stood apart from his former crew, speaking quietly with a detective about Victor's activities in the region. Jack watched from beneath the rest area's overhang, declining medical attention despite the various bruises and scrapes he'd accumulated. Years of combat had taught him the difference between injuries that needed immediate attention and those that could wait. Rachel stood nearby holding an ice pack to her shoulder where she'd caught a glancing blow during the fight. "You've been dealing with them long?" the lead trooper asked Rachel, notepad in hand. His name tag read Anderson, and his expression showed he'd been hoping to catch this gang for some time. "They started showing up about 3 months ago," Rachel replied, shifting the ice pack. "Small stuff at first. Intimidating travelers. Demanding donations for using the facilities. It got worse after Victor took over. But nobody ever stood up to them before tonight." She glanced at Jack with undisguised admiration. Trooper Anderson turned to Jack. "Got to say, taking on 30-plus bikers is either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Maybe both. But you probably saved lives tonight. Victor's crew has been terrorizing 3 counties. We've been building a case, but witnesses usually disappear before making statements." "They won't disappear this time," Sarah called out from where she sat with Emily. The teenager had finally been allowed to share her deleted video with the police, the footage providing clear evidence of both attacks. "We're all staying to testify." Bill and Martha nodded in agreement, Max sitting alertly between them. The elderly couple had proven themselves remarkably steady under pressure. "About time somebody stood up to bullies like that," Bill said, his hand resting on his wife's shoulder. "Reminds me of my own service days. Sometimes you have to make a stand." Mike and Luis had finished giving their statements and were checking their sedan for damage. The salesman looked exhausted but satisfied. "Never thought I'd be part of something like this," Mike admitted, straightening his wrinkled suit. "Guess you never know what you're capable of until the moment comes." The storm had finally begun to pass, the rain reduced to a gentle drizzle. Lightning still flickered occasionally in the distance, but the immediate danger, both natural and human, had passed. Recovery crews were arriving to clear the debris and repair the damage to the rest area's entrance. "We'll need statements from all of you," Anderson continued. "But they can wait until morning. For now, we've got squad cars posted at both highway entrances. You're safe here." He paused, consulting his notes. "Though I understand we have Mr. Winters here to thank for most of that." Jack shook his head. "Thank everyone." Rachel stood her ground when she could have left. The others chose to stay and fight instead of running. Danny found his courage and made the right choice. Victory doesn't always belong to the strongest. Sometimes it goes to those who simply refuse to be victims. Danny approached cautiously, his leather cut now stripped of gang insignias. "The detective says they've been building a case against Victor for months. Gun charges, extortion, assault. With our testimonies, he's going away for a long time." He looked at Jack with a mix of respect and uncertainty. "I know it doesn't make up for what we did, but I want to help make it right." "You took the first step," Jack replied. "That's usually the hardest part." He'd seen enough combat to know that redemption often began with a single choice to change direction. Rachel finished speaking with another trooper and joined them, wincing slightly as she rotated her shoulder. "Highway Patrol says they'll increase patrols in the area, but they don't expect any retaliation. Most of Victor's crew was already on probation. They won't risk coming back." The rest area's lights had been restored to normal operation, casting a familiar warm glow over the scene. Sarah and Emily helped Martha distribute coffee and snacks from the RV's supplies. Mike and Luis had pulled out their road maps again, but this time they were showing Bill alternative routes for his RV travels. The night's shared experience had forged connections that would likely last long after the police reports were filed. "What happens now?" Rachel asked, watching as tow trucks arrived to remove the few abandoned motorcycles from the parking lot. "Life goes on," Jack replied simply. "The rest area stays open. Travelers come and go. But maybe they'll find something more than just a place to rest. Maybe they'll find a reminder that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stand together." Danny cleared his throat. "I should go. Got a lot of things to straighten out, a lot of changes to make." He extended his hand to Jack. "Thank you." Not just for stopping us, but for showing me there's another way to find respect. Jack shook the offered hand, recognizing the moment for what it was. Not just the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another. Sometimes victory wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about changing the narrative, showing people they had the power to choose a different path. The first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern sky, promising a new day. The storm had passed, leaving behind not just physical evidence of its power, but proof that courage and unity could weather any tempest, natural or human. As morning approached, Mountain Pine Rest area slowly transformed back from a battlefield into a simple waypoint for travelers. The police presence had thinned to a couple of patrol cars, their lights now dark. Cleanup crews worked efficiently to remove the evidence of the night's conflict, sweeping broken glass and righting overturned furniture. Jack sat at the same picnic table where the confrontation had begun, though this time he wasn't alone. Rachel had brewed fresh coffee for everyone, and the group that had stood together through the night now sat together in the pale pre-dawn light, processing what they'd experienced. "I still can't believe we did that," Sarah said, her arm around Emily's shoulders. The teenager had finally crashed from her adrenaline high and was dozing against her mother. "I've always told Emily to avoid confrontation, to stay safe. But sometimes staying safe means standing up for yourself." Bill nodded, absently scratching Max behind the ears. "Reminds me of my time in Vietnam. You learn quick that the guy next to you, whether you've known him for years or met him that morning, he's your brother in that moment. Tonight felt like that." Martha squeezed his hand, understanding in her eyes. Mike and Luis had spread their sales materials across a nearby table, but they weren't looking at their figures. Instead, they were writing down contact information for everyone, creating an informal network. "After something like this," Mike explained, "you don't just walk away and forget. We should stay in touch." Rachel emerged from her office with a fresh pot of coffee. The bruise on her shoulder was darkening, but she carried herself with new confidence. Highway Patrol just radioed. Victor and his core group are being processed at county. With Danny's testimony and our statements, the DA's looking at multiple felony charges. The mention of Danny brought a thoughtful silence to the group. The young biker had left an hour earlier, but not before exchanging contact information with Jack. "He's got a rough road ahead," Jack said, pouring fresh coffee. "Breaking away from a gang isn't easy, but he took the first step, recognizing he had a choice." "Will they come back?" Emily asked sleepily, voicing the concern everyone shared. "Victor's other friends, maybe?" Jack considered his response carefully. Gangs like that operate on fear and reputation. Victor lost both tonight. Word will spread about what happened here. Not about how a veteran stopped them, but about how ordinary people stood together and said enough. That's the kind of story that destroys their power. Rachel sat down beside Jack, wincing slightly as she adjusted her position. "You know, I've worked here for 5 years, seen all kinds of people come and go. But I never felt like I was part of something important until tonight." "That's what they don't understand," Jack replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "Real strength isn't about having a power over others. It's about standing together, protecting what matters. I learned that in the Marines, the unit is stronger than any individual." Bill and Martha began sorting through their RV supplies, setting aside extra food and water. "We're usually so focused on getting to the next destination," Martha said, organizing packages of cookies and crackers. "Maybe sometimes the journey is about more than just moving forward. Sometimes it's about where you choose to make your stand." Luis looked up from his paperwork. "You know, we drive this route every month for sales calls. Maybe we could sort of keep an eye on things. Let Rachel know if we spot any trouble brewing." Mike nodded in agreement, already adding regular check-ins to his travel schedule. Sarah gently shook Emily awake. "We should get going soon. Your dad will be worried." The teenager sat up, rubbing her eyes, but her expression was determined. "Can we stop here again next trip? I want to make sure Rachel's okay." "We'll all keep in touch," Rachel assured her, sharing a knowing look with Jack. Something tells me this rest area is going to have plenty of regular visitors keeping watch. The sun finally crested the eastern mountains, its rays catching the lingering raindrops and turning them to diamonds. The storm-cleaned air carried the scent of pine and possibility. Jack stood, stretching muscles that would definitely remind him of the night's activities later. "The hardest part comes next," he said, looking at each member of their impromptu team. "Going back to normal life, carrying what we learned here. Remember, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about choosing to act despite that fear." Rachel touched the name tag on her uniform, then her brother's dog tags beneath. "We're not just going back to normal, though, are we? Everything's different now. We're different." The group nodded in understanding. They had entered the rest area as strangers, a veteran haunted by past battles, a lonely supervisor doing her job, a mother and daughter passing through, traveling salesmen focused on their route, an elderly couple enjoying retirement. They would leave as something else, proof that ordinary people, when united, could face down any threat. "Different is good," Bill said, helping Martha organize their supplies. "World needs more different like this, more people willing to stand together." The morning sun continued to rise, transforming the rest area with warm light. Soon, new travelers would arrive, unaware of the night's events. But for those who had been there, Mountain Pine Rest Area would forever represent something more than just a stop along the highway. It would stand as a reminder that sometimes the most important victories aren't won on traditional battlefields, but in simple places where ordinary people choose to stand their ground. 1 month later, Mountain Pine Rest Area hummed with its usual activity. The physical signs of that stormy night had been repaired. New glass installed, furniture replaced, paint touched up, but subtle changes remained for those who knew where to look. Rachel stood at her usual post, watching travelers come and go. Her shoulder had healed, though she still kept the baseball bat in her office. These days, it served more as a reminder than a weapon. The biggest change wasn't in the physical space, but in how she carried herself, confident, alert, unafraid. A familiar Harley-Davidson street. Bob pulled into the parking lot, its chrome gleaming in the autumn sun. Jack dismounted, removing his helmet as Rachel emerged from her office with fresh coffee already prepared. This had become their routine over the past month. He'd stop by weekly, sometimes just for coffee, sometimes to check on things. "Quiet day?" he asked, accepting the offered cup. Rachel nodded, leading him to what they now called the tactical table, the same picnic spot where everything had started. Pretty peaceful. Had some interesting visitors, though. You'll never guess who stopped by yesterday. "Danny?" Jack asked, though he already knew. He'd been keeping tabs on the former biker through his contacts. "Got himself a job with a mechanic in Miller's Creek," Rachel confirmed. "Said he's testifying against Victor next month. Seems like he's really trying to turn things around." She paused, sipping her coffee. "The DA says with all our testimonies and Danny's insider knowledge, Victor's looking at 15 to 20 years. Jack nodded approvingly. The system was working as it should, justice being served through legal channels rather than violence. "Heard from the others?" Rachel smiled, pulling out her phone. "Mike and Luis stop by twice a week now. They've adjusted their sales route. Bill and Martha email pictures from their RV trips. They're in Colorado now. Sarah and Emily visited last weekend. Emily's started a self-defense class at her high school. The rest area had gained new regulars, too. Truckers who'd heard about the stand against Victor's gang made a point of stopping, sharing coffee, and keeping watch in their own way. Local residents brought baked goods to show their support. The place had transformed from a simple pit stop into something of a community hub. Highway Patrol says biker activity is down 60% in the area," Rachel continued. "Word got around about what happened here. Turns out bullies don't like places where people stand together." Jack surveyed the parking lot, his tactical mind never quite at rest. But these days, he was looking for different things. Not threats, but signs of positive change. A mother confidently walking her children to the restroom. Elderly couples relaxing at the picnic tables. Travelers helping each other with directions or minor car troubles. You know, Rachel said thoughtfully, my brother used to tell me that the hardest part of serving wasn't the combat. It was coming home, feeling like civilians couldn't understand what he'd been through. But that night showed me that maybe we understand more than we think. Maybe we all have that warrior spirit when it matters. Jack nodded, understanding completely. Combat isn't about weapons or tactics. It's about choosing to stand when everything tells you to run. Everyone has that capacity. They just need to discover it. A school bus pulled into the lot, and Rachel checked her schedule. That's the field trip I told you about. Local middle school. They're doing a project on community service and civic responsibility. She grinned. They wanted to see where the Battle of the Rest area happened. Already becoming a legend, is it? Jack asked, amused. Better than that, Rachel replied. It's becoming a lesson. These kids are learning that their community belongs to them, not to whoever tries to take it by force. The bus parked, and excited children began filing out under their teacher's supervision. Some of them pointed at Jack, having recognized him from news reports. He'd avoided the publicity after that night, but some stories couldn't be kept quiet. Mr. Winters? A young boy approached, clutching a notebook. Is it true you were a Marine? My dad was a Marine, too. Jack smiled, seeing the same curiosity and determination in the boy's eyes that he'd recognized in Emily a month ago. Yes, I was. But you know what's more important? Learning when to stand up for what's right, and knowing you're never alone when you do. As the students gathered around, eager to hear about that stormy night, Jack shared the real lesson. Courage isn't reserved for soldiers or action heroes. It lives in every person who chooses to face their fears, in every community that stands together, in every moment someone decides that enough is enough. Rachel watched the scene with satisfaction. Mountain Pine Rest Area had become more than just a waypoint between destinations. It was a symbol now, a reminder that sometimes the most important victories aren't won through superior force, but through the simple courage of ordinary people choosing to stand their ground. The autumn wind carried the scent of pine needles and possibility, and somewhere in the distance thunder rolled. Not as a warning this time, but as a reminder of the night when a group of strangers became heroes, and a simple rest area became hallowed ground for a different kind of courage. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.